And record. Okay, so we're starting to record now. And so we'll begin with 3 bows to the Buddha. 1, 2, 3. And then with the salutation, Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. And today is July 9th, 2022. And now we're coming to the end of the Anguttara Nikaya, the Numerical Discourses, Book of Fours. And today I'm going to try, I don't know if I'll succeed in this, in a kind of marathon run, going through the remaining suttas, picking out those that are more interesting, elaborating a little bit upon them, and trying to come to the last grouping of suttas. So I might go a little quickly through some of this material, but I will pause and elaborate on the more interesting or important suttas. And so now we come to number 248. This is quite an important one. It has the title, The Growth of Wisdom, which is the theme. So 4 things that lead to the growth of wisdom. And in the next sutta, 249, we have basically exactly the same, almost the same sutta, except, and this is interesting, the text says that these are 4 things that are helpful to a human being. We could say 4 things that help to confirm or to elevate and to ennoble our human status.
Bhante, can you make the screen size a bit bigger?
Yeah, that can be done. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, if I go full screen.
That's excellent, Bhante.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have the 4 things that lead to, on the one hand, to the growth of wisdom, and 4 things that are helpful to a human being. Yeah, I was going to get the Pali for that. Okay, so what are these 4 things? So we have them: association with good persons, good people, hearing the good Dhamma, the Sad Dhamma, or the true Dhamma, yoniso manasikara, translated as here is careful attention, but I'm not completely satisfied with that. And then dhammanu dhamma patipatti, practice in accordance with the Dhamma. And now what's interesting and also important to note is that the same set of 4 items in the Samyutta Nikaya, together they are called the 4 factors for stream entry, the 4 things that lead to the attainment of stream entry. Do you see the word file?
Yes, Bhante.
I just pasted it in. So
yes,
here, this is in Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 55, sutta number 50. So the 4 things are called the 4 Sotapattiyanga, the 4 factors for attaining stream entry. And so people are also often asked, how do I become a stream enterer? How do I become a stream enterer? And I think the way is that you enroll for an intensive meditation course. But if you neglect the other factors, then just practicing meditation very diligently is not going to do the trick. We need all 4 of these items together. And here I pasted in the Pali terms, and I'll come back and elaborate upon them a little bit later. But in the first sutta in the series, they call the 4 factors for stream entry. A little bit later, they call the 4 things, when developed and cultivated, lead to the realization, to the attainment of the fruit of stream entry. Yes, so in the first instance, they lead to entering upon the path to stream entry. Here, they bring the realization of the fruit of stream entry. And then the following suttas say that they lead to the realization of the fruit of the once returner, the non-returner, and then even the fruit of arhatship. So to attain the fruit of arhatship, one needs these 4 things. And then the other suttas say that these 4 lead to obtaining wisdom, to the growth of wisdom, the expansion of wisdom, to great wisdom, and so on and so on. It seems to me that this is the way the reciters of the text in the line of oral transmission would keep on elaborating upon the benefits of these 4 things. A little bit, I have to say, a little bit like a little bit like an advertising agency. It doesn't design one particular advertisement, one advertisement for a particular purpose, a particular product, but every few months it has to change the wording of the advertisement to make it more attractive, more alluring. And so we have this expansion or this elaboration of the different terms to promote these 4 things. But it's enough to know that these 4 things are sort of crucial practices in developing and maturing in the Dhamma, particularly for arriving at wisdom, for great, deep, extensive wisdom. And so now let's look at these 4 things individually. And so the first of these, and it's so important that the Buddha includes this among the 4, is in Pali, Sapurisa Sangseva. So Sapurisa is from the word sat, or particle sat, which means good or true or real. And then Purisa, which in a narrow sense, it means a man, as opposed to iti, a woman, but in the broader sense, it means a person. So here we have good people, people who are real, true, genuine people. And what one has to do is establish a relationship with them by sangseva, which is translated here association, but it's more than just a casual association. It means getting close to them, becoming intimate with them. Even the word sangseva can suggest serving good people, true people, superior people. And the types of people to associate with ideally would be the Arya Pugala, the noble ones, the ones who have attained stages of realization. But since we don't know offhand who has attained real, true realization, and we might not be able to find them, but we have to find people who are deeply grounded in the Saddhamma, in the teaching of the Buddha, who are dedicated to the practice, and who can serve as guides, examples, models, exemplars, and so forth. And it's quite significant that the Buddha places this quality at the very beginning of the 4 things that lead to the attainment of any realization or to the attainment of great wisdom, because it shows that from the outset that the Buddha wanted his teaching to have a certain, we can call this a social dimension, that it brings together people around the Dhamma. So too often what I found when I was a monk in Sri Lanka, especially amongst the Westerners who become monks in Sri Lanka, that they get ordained and then they think the real way to practice the Dhamma is you cut your tie with your teacher, with your original ordination temple, and you just find an isolated kuti a little cottage or hut out in the wilderness, and then you practice there. And there might be some who have the kind of temperament that inclines to that way of life. But so many of the Westerners that became monks in Sri Lanka back in those days, 1980s, 1990s, they practiced very diligently for 6 months, a year, maybe some will last a year and a half, 2 years, but then they start to get burnt out. Of course, there's little or no human contact. But the Buddha had the wisdom to make association with the good people, communion with the good people, sort of the foundation for the unfolding of the practice of his teaching. And there's an interesting sutta that I took just the excerpt just before it occurs later in the Anguttara Nikaya. If I remember, I closed the source file, but it's Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Eights, number 58. It's called Digajanu Sutta. Of course, it was given to a young man named Digajanu. And this young man comes to the Buddha and says that he comes with his group of friends and he says, we are householders. We're not living the renunciant life. We have wife and children, or the women have husband and children. So teach us something that's beneficial to people in our situation. And then the Buddha teaches a number of practices that are suitable for householders. And one of these is good friendship. And then he elaborates what is meant by good friendship. So he says, wherever a clansman, or we could say wherever a young man or a young woman lives, I have to be careful. Now in America, the word clansman has bad connotations. So let's just put a young man. Okay, so I've tried to broaden the language to make it gender neutral. Okay, so wherever a young man or a young woman lives, they associate with householders or their sons and daughters, whether they are young but of mature virtue or old and of mature virtue. So they have to be well established in virtue and good conduct, and accomplished in faith, virtuous behavior, generosity, and wisdom. So those are the those are the qualities in the people that you're looking for to associate with. And this is, of course, specifically for the Buddhist practitioner, those who are established in strong, sincere, dedicated faith in the three jewels, in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, who are for lay people well established in the 5 precepts and other aspects of good behavior, who are generous, helpful to others, and have some wisdom, at least some intellectual understanding of the Dharma. And then one associates with them, one draws close to them. And this is interesting. He says you have conversations with them, discussions with them. And so in this way, you get to learn from them. What does it mean to be accomplished in faith, in good behavior, in generosity and wisdom? And not only does one have conversations with them, but you emulate them, you imitate them with regard to their faith, their conduct, their generosity, and their wisdom. Yeah, so this is having good association, associating with good people. And there's an expression that's come to be more typical now of Hinduism, but you might have heard it. They speak about satsang. And now amongst the Hindus, satsang has come to mean the group of devotees come to sit around their guru, and sometimes they sit in silence, and sometimes the guru will give a little talk. But this expression, satsang, I suspect has been absorbed into Hinduism from Buddhism, because we have the word Sapurisa, which in Sanskrit there would be Sat Purusha. So that is the Sat, and then the Sang component here is just the truncated form of the word Sangha. So that is the Sangha is the community of good people, people established in faith, virtue, generosity, and wisdom. Okay, so this is the first of these factors for whether stream entry, the higher stages, the growth of wisdom. But it's important to associate with good people. And if you're in a living situation, a neighborhood, a community where you don't have access to a Buddhist vihara, temple, meditation center, Dharma center, whatever, but it's good to seek out a few Dhamma friends with whom you can associate. You can have house meetings and maybe listen to a recorded Dhamma talk, meditate together, or somebody can read some passages from the suttas, then you discuss them together. And in this way, you develop this close association with the good. And in this time, when so many people are using the internet and Zoom, you could form good communities of the good persons over these platforms like Zoom, Google Meeting, and so forth. Okay, so that's the starting point. You associate with the good. And then when you associate with the good, that gives the opportunity for Saddhamma Savanang. That is translated here as hearing the true Dhamma, or maybe better, listening to the true Dhamma or the good Dhamma. Of course, even if I'm reciting a Buddhist text outside, the fish in the water could hear the true Dhamma. The birds flying around will hear the good Dhamma, but they're not listening. But it's not enough just to hear it, but you have to pay attention, which means that you're listening. And again, the word Saddhamma is again from that same prefix, Sat, which can be translated good or true. So here I have true Dhamma. In the Anguttara, translated as good Dhamma. So once you're associating with the good persons, then the good person will find the opportunity to speak on the Dhamma. And we have to remember, the Buddha's time, you don't have books to read, printed books. There are no libraries, no bookstores, no Amazon.com for ordering books, no printed Tripitakas, not even in Pali. But to learn the Dhamma, you have to go to a teacher and listen to the Dhamma. So that's why we have listening to the true Dhamma or the good Dhamma. And then it's not enough to just hear the Dhamma, to listen to it, but you have to examine the meaning. So we have here an expression, yoniso manasikara, which I think in both texts I translated as careful attention, but maybe that's not so satisfactory. In some places, manasikara will mean attention. In those cases, as a universal mental factor, it's the factor that's said to be responsible for the mind turning to an object. So when something new comes into the field, the domain of awareness, there's a particular mental function of turning to that new object, and that is manasikara. But here, I don't think it's that function of turning to the object that's meant by manasikara, but rather manasikara here, I take to be turning something over in the mind, turning it over repeatedly in the mind. And the word yoniso, it has several shades of meaning, but the way that it's explained in the commentaries, it's explained as upaya manasikara. So it's attention that is, or let's say reflection. In this context, I would use for manasikara reflection that's moving in the right direction. A reflection that is examining something deeply and thoroughly and methodically, not superficially, not examining something in terms of one's biases, prejudices, likes and dislikes, but looking at something clearly, honestly, openly, maybe incisively, with the aim of penetrating deep into it in order to gain some understanding. And there's another sequence that we come across in the text. I pasted that passage in. Yeah, this helps maybe to clarify what is meant by yoniso manasikara. So I think this is Sariputta speaking. He's speaking about 10 stages in cultivation. And so first one has faith in wholesome qualities. And we skip over these two because these are concerned with the moral aspect. Then one has energy, and then one has wisdom. But I think I suspect that wisdom here is maybe out of place, because the next one is that one lends an ear. So that is almost the same thing as hearing the good Dhamma. So you bend your ear, you incline your ear to listen to the teaching from somebody who's expounding it. And then once you hear the teaching, then you have to retain it in mind. So preserve it so you don't forget it. Then the next factor is said to be examining the meaning. One examines the meaning. And the Pali expression used here is completely different from yoniso manasikara. I think it's at upa. I didn't copy it down. I think it's atassa upaparikara, examination of the meaning. But then this leads to practicing in accordance with the Dhamma. And that is what we find in this passage on the growth of wisdom, that one practices in accordance with the Dhamma. So to practice in accordance with the Dhamma, here this would entail especially, it would be assumed that one has established the roots of sila, of good conduct, but then one goes on to practice, I would say, the development of samatha and vipassana, or one practices the 4 foundations of mindfulness, or one develops the 5 spiritual faculties, whatever, many ways to understand practicing in accordance with the Dhamma. Okay, and those are said to be also the 4 things that are helpful to a human being. Okay, maybe if there are some questions now, we can take some questions. And the way to pose the question is you'll find on the bottom of your Zoom screen, it could be a hand symbol, or if you don't have the hand symbol there, it might be in the reactions icon. You click that and you'll see the hand symbol. Okay, I see. You're wrong.
Yes, Bande. Does the manasikara here have anything to do with the mental factor that occurs before contact occurs? When a sense faculty meets a sense object, there needs to have attention. Is this the same as the manasikara you were explaining?
Yeah, that is the kind of manasikara that I said should be distinguished from this manasikara. This is my opinion. Of course, that manasikara, the kind that you're referring to, that is said to be it's one of the factors that's included in Dhamma, and in the Abhidharma, it's one of the 7 universal mental factors. And that is the mental factor, according to the Abhidharma commentaries, that's responsible for turning the mind to an object that enters the field of awareness. That is, maybe we use another English word, advertence, turning to the object. But I don't think that is what is intended by yoniso manasikara. I think I take yoniso manasikara to be like a careful, close, detailed, methodical, thorough reflection, examination of a particular subject. It's not just the initial turning of the mind to the object.
Then does yoniso manasikara has anything to do with sanya?
I myself wouldn't turn yoniso manasikara into a single mental factor, sort of following the Abhidharma model. But I take it as something that we could see for ourselves just in ordinary experience. And of course, sanya, in the sense of forming an idea, having perceptions or forming ideas that are necessary for yoniso manasikara, just as it's necessary for any kind of mental experience. But this is, like repeatedly, you take up like a topic, maybe you take up the topic of the 3 characteristics, impermanence, dukkha, non-self, or 5 aggregates, or 4 noble truths, whatever. And then you reflect on them, you examine them, you try to explore what are the implications of this teaching? How does this relate to my own experience? Where does my own experience fit in to these particular frameworks of the teaching? That's my understanding of yoniso manasikara.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And also, it just occurred to me that a place in the suttas where one finds yoniso manasikara mentioned, but I think with a different function from here, is if you go to the Anguttara Nikaya Book of Ones, Okay, so here the Buddha uses the verb form. He says, for one who attends carefully to the mark or feature of the unattractive, unarisen sensual desire does not arise, and arisen sensual desire is abandoned. Yeah, so here, yoniso manasikara is employed in, I would say, within the context of meditative practice. So when sensual desire arises, so somebody who wants to abandon sensual desire will then reflect carefully, thoroughly, systematically to the unattractive nature of things. And in this case, it's particularly the body by way of the 32 parts. And then it's used in relation to abandoning ill will or hatred. One attends carefully to the liberation of the mind by loving kindness, and then one can abandon ill will. And similarly, yoniso manasikara features in relation to the other hindrances among the 5 hindrances. But yeah, I'd say that this is a somewhat different function of yoniso manasikara, because here it seems to be used in the context of one who's already engaged in practicing in accordance with the Dhamma. So when they're practicing in accordance with the Dhamma, say maybe trying to develop concentration and insight, unwholesome states arise, the 5 hindrances arise. In that case, one employs yoniso manasikara to remove those unwholesome hindrances that arise. Yeah, that's my understanding here. Okay, let's move on, and we have Samantha Jayatilaka.
Thank you, Bhante. I've heard the expression yoniso as being literally translated as someone said, the womb of the womb, the beginning, and whether it could be the origin of something arising. Would that be correct? And to see, like, I don't know whether there's a link to the dependent origination as well. So how things are linked, the arising of something, the very beginning, manasikara. And also, Bhante, the second question is...
yeah, let's take one question at a time.
Yeah, sorry, thank you.
I'm getting a bad memory, so if somebody asks me 2 questions, when I get the second question, then I forget the first one. Okay. Yeah, the word yoni can mean the womb, and also it means the female sexual organ, and then it has a more general meaning of a mode of origin. So there are 4 yonis for living beings to arise. So one of them is the egg, another is the womb, another is moisture, and another is spontaneous birth. Yeah, so in certain contexts, it does mean yoni, and yoniso is an adverb built on the word yoni. I don't know whether it always means examining from the origin. Of course, if you're going to be examining things closely, then at least in relation to a number of things, you would look at them from the point of view of their origin. But I'm not sure that that applies in all circumstances. Yeah, when we have to do like a methodical study of the expression yoniso manasikara.
Thank you, Bhante. And just quickly, thank you for the explanation. And also, I always get confused with this yoniso manasikara and sati sampajana.
Yeah, that's a very, it's a common question, a common point of confusion. The way and it seems that yoniso manasikara and sampajanya are might be seen as closely related, though in the suttas and the commentary, even in the commentaries, they're, to my knowledge, they're never identified. So it seems to me that, that the primary sense of sampajanya is knowing what is going on, knowing what is taking place. When you're doing something, knowing what you're doing, knowing clearly what you are doing. When you're observing, this is in this methodical meditation, when something is happening in the mind, knowing clearly what is happening in the mind. But it seems that's that sampajanya by itself doesn't necessarily imply sort of that element of examination, investigation, or reflection.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Bhante. So initially, maybe just sort of like, I think remember Bhante used the word one's purpose or something, and maybe awareness of exactly what is one is doing, and maybe
that could be one aspect. In fact, in the commentaries, it's one aspect of sampajanya, of clear comprehension. When you're about to do something, you are aware of the purpose in doing it. And then you can determine whether the purpose is a worthwhile one or...
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Bhante. That really clarifies it. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other hands raised. So let's move on then. Spent a lot of time. I was going to jump through. Okay, some suttas that we dealt with in earlier classes, I'm just going to jump over. We have these declarations, ignoble, noble, and but I should just mention that these become particularly relevant, the way they tie in here. That they're used, I think, in relation to the monastic community, when somebody might be, one monk has been accused of a particular transgression, and then some other monk is called, or other person is called as a witness, and then one is expected to declare what one has actually seen without falsifying what one has seen, to say what one has heard without falsifying it. Actually, the sense doesn't quite tie in so well. Or to declare what one has cognized, what kind of inferences or suspicions one has held, and not make false statements about one's suspicions. And this could apply also in secular life, if you're called maybe to jury duty, or maybe called as a witness in a court of law, that you should be, I think when you're sworn in, you're supposed to say what you have seen, what you've heard, what you have learned from others, and not falsify it. Okay, so those are the declarations. Okay, this is one that's quite important. So this is the general title here is direct knowledge, which in Pali is abhinya. And usually it refers to the word abhinya, direct knowledge or higher knowledge. So the verb abhijanati is to know. Janati means to know. And then the prefix abhi gives a higher sense, to know in a higher way, or in a way through direct experience, so to directly know. And so we have four things that are to be directly known, or four areas in which this direct knowledge operates. So we have things to be fully understood by direct knowledge, things to be abandoned, then things to be developed, and then things to be realized. And now, if you are familiar with the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the traditional first sermon of the Buddha, then, and you are familiar with the whole sutta, not just the first part of it, then you'll know that these four terms are applied respectively. Each is applied respectively to one or another of the Four Noble Truths. So in regard to the Four Noble Truths, each one has its own particular, we could say, its own particular function or task. So each truth implies or entails a task. So in the Dhammacakka Sutta, the Buddha says this noble truth of dukkha is to be fully understood. This truth of the origin of dukkha, that is craving, is to be abandoned. This noble truth of the cessation of dukkha, that is nibbana, is to be realized. And this noble truth of the way or the path is to be developed. And so those four terms, you could say, almost provide a compendium of the entire teaching of the Buddha. So there are sort of the four tasks imposed upon us by the teaching is to understand things, certain things, to abandon other things, to develop or cultivate or practice other things, and to realize still other things. Yeah, and there's a sutta, where does it occur? In the Majjhima Nikaya, sutta number 91, where an old Brahmin asks the Buddha, how is one a Buddha? What makes one a Buddha? Then the Buddha says, I have fully understood that which is to be fully understood. I've abandoned that which is to be abandoned. I've developed that which is to be developed. Therefore, I am a Buddha. He doesn't mention what is to be realized because the verse only has 4 lines or 6 lines, so we can't fit everything in. But we know that the 4th item is implied. Okay, so here we have a development of these 4 themes, a little bit different from in the first sermon. Okay, the things to be fully understood. So what are the things to be understood? The 5 aggregates. The 5 aggregates which are bound up with clinging. So if you remember the Buddha's in the first sermon, the Buddha's explanation of the First Noble Truth, he says, what is the truth of dukkha? Then he goes through the more obvious forms of suffering, birth, old age, sickness, and death. But at the end, he says, in brief, it's the 5 aggregates bound up with clinging that are dukkha. Okay, so in a way, this also corresponds to the First Noble Truth. And so we have to fully understand the 5 aggregates. And to fully understand them means to understand them in terms of their nature as being first to understand the significance or meaning of each aggregate in its own individual nature, material form, feeling, perception, the volitional activities, and consciousness, and then to understand them in their universal or general nature as being impermanent, bound up with suffering, and non-self. So that is full understanding, the full understanding of the 5 aggregates. Okay, then the things to be abandoned by direct knowledge. So what's actually to be abandoned by direct knowledge are all the defilements. So we take them all comprehensively. So in the highest sense, those are, whether it's the 3 bad roots, greed, hatred, and delusion, the 5 hindrances, the 7 underlying tendencies, the 10 fetters, the 16 corruptions of the mind, all of them are to be abandoned by direct knowledge. But at the sort of, to make it simple and concise, the Buddha picks out just 2 things that are to be abandoned. That is ignorance and the craving for renewed existence, because those are the most basic, the most fundamental defilements which underlie all of them. And it's those defilements that sort of keep the cycle of samsara turning. Sometimes people ask, why does a text like this, why doesn't it mention hatred or ill will? I think the reason is that even though hatred is something to be definitely to be abandoned, to be overcome, but hatred is not a direct cause for the continuation of samsara. Of course, it leads, it does keep samsara going, but hatred in its own nature leads to a rebirth in the lower destinations. But ignorance and the craving for existence can lead to rebirth anywhere, even in the highest planes. So those are the more fundamental underlying roots. And we see this also in the three asavas. We have sensual craving, and craving for existence, and ignorance. So those are the things to be abandoned. Then the things to be developed by direct knowledge. But first, let's take, here with the things to be developed and the things to be realized, a little different from in the first sermon, though we could say that there's some overlap. So the things to be developed here is said to be samatha and vipassana, serenity or calmness or samadhi, and insight, that's vipassana or panya, wisdom. In the first sermon, the Buddha says what's to be developed are the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. But it seems that in this sutta, the Buddha is speaking to those who already have right view, right intentions, who are already established in the factors of sila. So they don't need the other factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. But here, the Buddha just picks out samadhi, which is referred to under the heading of samatha, serenity, and right view in its higher aspect of direct insight. So for those like advanced practitioners, they don't have to worry so much about right speech, right action, right thought, and so on, but their focus is on developing samadhi and wisdom, or samatha and vipassana. So those are the things to be developed. And then what are the things to be realized? In the first sermon, the Buddha says the noble truth of dukkha, the noble truth of the cessation of dukkha, that is nibbana, is to be realized. But here he speaks just of true knowledge and liberation. And so in Pali, these are vijja and vimutti. And these occur actually in a particular sequence. So as one develops, when one develops serenity and insight, or samadhi and wisdom, when these reach a certain pinnacle, then they give rise to vijja, here translated true knowledge or clear knowledge. And so this is usually the clear knowledge of the Four Noble Truths. And when this clear knowledge arises, then the mind is released from the defilements, particularly from the three asavas, the underlying flux or leakages of the mind, and that is vimutti. And so this is something to be realized, to be experienced by direct knowledge. So those are the four things. Okay, we could see if there's any new round. Whoops. So somebody raised the question, can you explain in more detail what direct knowledge is in this context? Yeah, so I think, so this is knowing through direct experience, not just knowing through sort of intellectual, through hearing from others, from learning, or from thinking and reflection, but knowing through direct experience. So through the five aggregates, say one fully understands them by direct knowledge. In this case, one enters into the stage of developing insight, and so one looks into each of the aggregates, and so one could actually sort of sense, sort of as concrete experience, what is material form? What are the feelings? What are the perceptions? the volitions, the consciousness. So first one is able to clearly differentiate and distinguish the 5 aggregates. And then one moves to the next level when one observes their arising and passing away, and directly perceiving the arising and passing away brings to the forefront the characteristic of impermanence. And then through impermanence, one could see that these 5 aggregates are insecure, unreliable, so they're dukkha. And one sees that the 5 aggregates don't contain any core of selfhood, so they're non-self. Yeah, so similar will apply to each of the other factors. Okay, let us continue. Okay, so we have Yong.
Bhante?
Yeah.
Probably I'm confused, but this direct knowledge is different from the direct knowledge in Majjhima Nikaya 4, which enable you to see the previous lives and so on.
Oh, I see. It's the same verb used. The same verb is used, abhijanati. But here, the term direct knowledge is not necessarily implying the ability to see one's previous lives. Yeah, here, different domains of direct knowledge are being referred to.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah, it's the same, you say it's the same mental function, knowing through direct perception. But in that passage, he says, abhinyasing. So I directly knew my past lives going back hundreds of lives, thousands of lives, many aeons of past lives. Then I directly knew the passing away and rebirth of other beings. Yeah, so it's the same mental faculty, same mental function of directly knowing, but in that sutta, it refers to past lives and the arising and passing of beings. Here, it's referring to other things. Okay, I don't see any other hands, so we can move on. Okay, this I wasn't going to spend much time on, but just go through it quickly. Because we find this contrast of the ignoble quests and the noble quests elaborated in a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, sutta number 26. It's called the Arya Pariyesana Sutta, the Buddha's discourse on the noble quest, where he speaks about his own reflections when he was still living as a prince in his mansion, and then his decision to renounce and become an ascetic and so forth. So we have 4, and there it's elaborated. So we have the 4 ignoble quests. So someone who's himself subject to old age, seeks things that are subject to old age, seeks what is subject to illness, what is subject to death, what is subject to defilement. And the 4 noble quests is that when we're subject to old age, sickness, and death ourself, subject to defilement ourself, we seek the unaging, the illness-free, deathless, supreme security from bondage, nibbana, the undefiled nibbana. Okay, just move on. Yeah, if you want to see this elaboration of this, you can go to Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 26. Okay, we'll skip over this. Families, I'd mark this, but I won't remain long with it. So what leads to the deterioration of families, of households? Okay, they don't seek what has been lost. They do not repair what has become decrepit. They overindulge in eating, drinking, and today we could vastly expand this, and let's say in pursuing luxurious enjoyments and overconsumption and so on. And then they appoint an immoral woman or man to be their chief. And the opposite is the reason why families live long. Okay, various qualities of a worthy monk. Again, these are self-explanatory. Courses of karma. Now we come to this is the last part of the Book of Fours, and this is a especially interesting section, because I'm sure that this is the work of the compilers of the canonical texts, and it's their way of trying to make the teaching of each chapter of the Anguttara Nikaya all comprehensive. And so the way this works, since this is the Book of Fours, so this chapter takes 3 sets of practices which involve 4 items. So we have the 4 satipatthanas, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, or 4 establishments of mindfulness. Then we have the 4 right strivings, or 4 right efforts. And then the 4 iddhipadas, the 4 bases for psychic power, or the 4 bases for success. Okay, so we have 3 sets of 4. And then each of these is going to be applied for 10 tasks. Let me get a little numerical file open. Okay, so we have 3 sets of 4. Each is going to be applied to 10 tasks. And each task is going to be applied to 17 defilements. So we have 170 by 3. Anybody? Anybody quick with the arithmetic?
510.
510.
510, Bhante.
510.
Yeah, 510, Bhante.
So in this way, we create 510 suttas, all crammed into about 2 pages. Okay, so first, I've already gone through the 3 sets of items. Now we have 10 tasks. So the sutta is elaborated for the first task. Here again, we have direct knowledge. For direct knowledge, and then 1 defilement mentioned of lust. So we use the defilement as the sort of anchor point, and the task is going to vary. The first one is direct knowledge. Okay, then we come to the other 10 tasks, or the other 9 tasks: full understanding, utter destruction, abandoning, destruction, vanishing, fading away, cessation, giving up, relinquishment, all with respect to lust. So we have the 10 functions, and some of them are very similar: direct knowledge, full understanding, just the difference of degree. The other terms are pretty much all just synonyms for basically the same thing. That's elimination. So we have knowledge and elimination, but indicated under different terms because the compilers want to pick out all the different words used throughout the suttas to indicate that task of elimination or abandoning. Okay, so in this way, we have 10 functions in regard to lust, but the defilements don't end with lust, but then they continue on. We have 16 more defilements. So then we go to hatred, delusion, anger, hostility. So this is when ill will or hatred sort of builds up over time. Then it turns into a kind of persisting ill will towards somebody. So that is called hostility. I think this is mukha in Pali. No, this is upanaha. Then comes denigration. This is where you put the other person down, either in your own mind or verbally. Then comes insolence, or maybe presumption, where you sort of act boldly without any kind of humility or any kind of, you try to dominate others. You push yourself into a group and you claim, I'm the one who knows best. We should do things my way. So this is insolence. Then we have envy, envying the gains or good qualities of others, miserliness, not wishing to share with others, deceitfulness, covering up one's own bad qualities, and craftiness. This is displaying virtues that one doesn't possess. Actually, I think it's the opposite. Deceitfulness is displaying virtues that one doesn't possess, and craftiness is covering up one's own bad qualities. Obstinacy, being stubborn, rivalry, sort of always having a competitive outlook towards others, conceit, thinking I am the best one, I am the excellent one, arrogance, this is where you think so much of yourself that you start disparaging and denigrating others. Then intoxication, this is vanity. You become vain because maybe you're beautiful, you're rich, you come from a good family, you have a good reputation. So you become intoxicated with your fame, with your reputation, with your wealth, with your beauty, and so on. And then heedlessness, that is, you become negligent and you stop cultivating good qualities and you fall into unwholesome qualities. Okay, so these all together, they make, taking all of them together, together with lust, so we have 17 defilements, and these 10 functions are to be exercised in regard to them. So here we have 16 by 10, that's 160, and then the 10 with lust, that's another 10, so together they form 170. And that is, those are all of the functions to be performed by developing the 4 foundations of mindfulness, but the same functions are to be performed by developing the 4 right efforts or right strivings and the 4 bases for psychic potency. So in this way we get, here I just put the breaks to show where each is to be developed. 170 3 times. So, so 510 total. Let's put the total in. And that takes us to the end of the Book of Fours in the Anguttara Nikaya. So we started this Book of Fours, I think, in the winter, or let's say the late fall of 2019. So we can all congratulate ourselves on completing the book of fours. Next time we'll start the book of fives, and probably I'm going to go through the fives somewhat more quickly and just choose the more interesting suttas to elaborate. Okay, any questions on this section? Yeah, as we'll see, when we come to the book of fives, that book will put at the end of the book of fives, it'll put different groups of factors involving 5 items to perform the same functions, the same 10 functions with the same 17 defilements. Okay, I see a couple of hands went up on Anguttara Nikaya. You can lower.
Hello, Bhante.
Yeah, okay.
Can you go into a little bit more detail on what exactly is practice in accordance with the Dhamma, please?
I think it's a very, very, excuse me, I'm getting some phlegm in my throat. It's a very broad expression under which you could place so many different modes of practice. So it can include these items that we just went through, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 4 right efforts, the 4 bases for spiritual potency. It can be, but I'd say it would be any methods that conduce to the development of samatha and vipassana, to cultivating the practices that lead to concentration and wisdom. Yeah, you could just fill it in virtually any way you like. Okay, Brenda.
Yes, Bhante, thank you for your teachings. I would like to understand the word lust is used throughout the suttas and in this sutta.
Yeah.
Is that generally focused on sexual lust, or is it a much broader definition of desire?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that the word raga in Pali, when we tried to translate it, I've had to settle for the usual translation as lust, but the English word lust too often suggests almost exclusively or largely suggests sexual desire. But the word raga in Pali has a much broader meaning. So it can be the raga desire that arises for anything through the 5 senses, the 5 sense faculties, but also it can imply, like, I guess it can be raga, lust for power, position, wealth. And even we come across the expression rupa raga and arupa raga, which would be raga in regard to the higher realms of rebirth, the desire for rebirth in the form realm and in the formless realm. Yeah, when we use lust for form existence or lust for formless existence, it doesn't sound natural, but I don't know what to do. I don't like to use the word desire, because then when the Buddhist texts speak about abandoning desire, then people think, oh, then I have to give up even the desire to do good things, which is not the case. Yeah, but raga can be sort of any kind of self-centered desire.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, we move on. So V.
Yes, good morning, Bhante.
Morning.
I have a question in regards to the true knowledge. Does one have to wait until the mind is bright to really contemplate, to pierce through the ignorance and arouse the true knowledge? Or one can possibly get a tiny star and, not so bright and start to contemplate after the meditation?
Of course, you can start to contemplate at any point, but what is translated as true knowledge, vijja, implies like a higher attainment of knowledge. Yeah, but to contemplate with insight, you don't have to wait until what you call the mind is bright. But one could start doing contemplation virtually at any point where the mind is fairly stable and steady.
So it's to contemplate the 12 aspects as in the Dhamma chakra, or one has to contemplate the Four Noble Truths and then go into the 3 marks of existence, or the 12 aspects, and then start to contemplate the anicca, dukkha, anatta, because that would take hours, like 6 hours. I tried once and it's far too long. Is that a way to speed it up?
To go through the entire Satipatthana Sutta, this Dhammacakka Sutta? I didn't quite understand.
Yeah, I try to go through the Four Noble Truths, and then focus on the 3 aspects, the 12 aspects, each of the truth, to look into the suffering, and that all the way to the 5 aggregates, and that to the second noble truth, and that look into the 12 DO, the 12 dependent origination, and that forward and backward. And that Eightfold Path.
Yeah, I would call that reflection rather than contemplation. And of course, you can do that reflection at any time. It's good if the mind is somewhat steady, but you don't need a deep degree of samadhi to do that kind of reflection.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to have to end the session now because I have to go up for the meal and they're all waiting for me. And so I'm sorry, but I can't take all of the questions. So we'll end here. Oh, next week, we won't have our regular class because I'm giving the Russia class, but people who are join my regular class here are welcome to join the Russia class, and you'll get the link in the course of the week. Keep the link to yourself. Don't post it anyplace. Don't put it online. Of course, last time, the first class we had an invasion of disruptors, but you're welcome to join for yourself. Okay, I'm going to end with just quickly sharing the merits. And then I also wanted to mention that starting next Sunday evening, Venerable Mangala will give a series of talks based on the Satipatthana Sutta. So there'll be a short meditation from 7 to 7:30, and then he'll have some talks on the Satipatthana Sutta with questions and answers. Okay, so we'll share the merits. Akasa ta chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasa ta chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasa ta chabumata Deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang dukkha pata chani dukkha baya pata chani baya soka pata chani soka hantu sabepi panino. May those in suffering be free from suffering. May those in fear be free from fear. May those in sorrow be free from sorrow. May all living beings also be thus. And then we end with 3 bows to the Buddha.
Thank you.
Can I bow to Bhante?
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay.
Thank you, Bhante. Wonderful to see you, Bhante.
Okay, thank you.
Be safe, Bhante.
Okay.
Thank you, Bhante.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bhante.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, bye-bye.
Does he speak English?
Yeah.
Okay, bye-bye.